Hi, my name is Alyssa, and I'm with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District in northwest New Mexico. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to discuss with you all a very simple and effective technique right now to conserve water and to continue to be water smart in our daily activities and how we work with the land. And that simple method is mulching. So in this conversation, we'll be talking about what mulching is, the different varieties of mulch that you have to choose from based on your goals, and tips and tricks as you practice and continue to learn how to mulch and how it works best for you. So to begin things off, mulching is the practice simply of spreading out a protective layer of materials over the ground. And these materials can be in a variety of different forms, which we'll cover in a little bit more detail later. But mulching helps maintain the soil stability and the health of it in a variety of different ways. This protective layer reduces sun and soil contact and reduces the evaporation rate of the precious moisture that we're trying to hold on to. This layer also helps regulate temperature on top of moisture, in that it keeps soil warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. And since it shades out most of the sun, it also helps suppress weedy seeds from germinating that you may not want to be pulling out or spraying, and so is a good preventative measure to help avoid unwanted plants in your property. And another way I like to think about mulch is that it is a form of a sponge. This protective layer absorbs all of the impact from rain events and storms, and thus helping the soil stay less compacted from this force and helping it stay in one spot and from eroding off. And not only that, but depending on the types of mulch that you use, you are essentially adding slowly nutrients to the soil, such as organic materials and phosphates and nitrates for your plants to use as food. And finally, mulching just really beautifies up the garden. It's very aesthetically pleasing, and depending on the material that you use and the style you want, you can make it into a very functional and beautiful space. So when most people think about mulches, most of the time we have the typical bag of wood chips that we can get at Lowe's. That's the first typical mulch that pops into people's heads. But it's important to remember that since mulch is simply just a protective layer of material over the ground, that can relate to any type of material. This can include straw, grass, paper, gravel, rocks, plastic, and more. And your mulching goals will help you choose on the type of material that is right for you. So let's go through a little bit more detail into the different types. So for organic mulches is anything that is biodegradable. Basically anything that is paper-based, plant-based, or manure-based. And this quality makes them great for improving the soil conditions by decomposing and slowly providing additional organic material and nutrients to your soil. And in doing so, it loosens up the soil, gets it nice and aerated at the same time. And this aeration is an important part of adding nutrients, and that it lets plant roots being able to have enough space and an easier time to grow and breathe while they're developing. And it also creates a great road system and an easier way to travel for earthworms and other beneficial soil organisms that are there in your soil. And it also helps, the aeration also helps to increase the rate of infiltration of water into the soil. How porous is it where the water is able to percolate deeper down for those roots to really be able to use? There's just so many incredible benefits of doing the aeration for organic mulches. Now, for inorganic mulches, that is anything that can't break down, which includes anything natural, such as gravel or rock, or anything human-made, such as plastic sheeting, landscaping, fabric, netting, or rubber mulch. And even though they don't decompose and won't add any beneficial additives into your soil, it does have a longer lifespan because of that, and so it can be cost-effective and practical for larger pieces of land to be mulched with this method. So let's take some opportunity to go through these a little bit one by one and look at their pluses and minuses and things to consider. Now, wood and tree bark are a great material that last a particularly long time and decompose slowly. So you're not going to be having to put it on multiple times a season or every year even, maybe even every other year. And even whenever you have finely shredded wood chips, bark is coarse enough to allow for proper aeration of the soil underneath. It's porous enough where it still allows water to infiltrate and it still allows the soil to breathe, while being dense enough that it does not blow off with the wind, and it takes a little bit less maintenance to keep in place. One thing that is good to remember with different qualities of wood chips is that hardwood bark clippings contain more nutrients than softer wood bark, but both of them would be equally beneficial, and oftentimes the softwood bark chips are much more common to come by. But that is something to look for if you're thinking about looking for bark that offers the most bang for your buck. And one other thing to remember for bark and wood chips is that to be careful of where you source your materials. And this can apply to any type of mulching that you're used, being known if it has been any contact with pesticides or something like that. Bark products, oftentimes, bag products you can get from department stores, they are known to cause phytotoxicity, as in they have the residual pesticides from the plant used and it's growing before being chipped, and that residuals can have an impact on your plants if it's in high enough quantities. And normally for bark mulches, you do not want to directly incorporate it into the soil. You normally do about 2 to 4 inches, a layer of it on the top only, and because this bark is so rich in carbon, it's mostly only made of carbon, and if this is incorporated into the soil too quickly, it can create a nitrogen deficiency by an overabundance of carbon for your plants. So make sure to watch out for that. Also, some woods, such as pine, cedars, and cypress, also can repel pests, such as fleas, gnats, and ticks. So depending on the variety of wood chips that you use, and also can be a natural pest deterrent. Straw and hay is another option that is very popular for ranchers and farmers and other agriculturalists. The first thing that I want to touch on first is the differentiation between straw and hay. Straw is the hollow stalk of a cereal crop, such as oats, barley, wheat, or rye, after they have their seed heads removed. Hay is grass products that have been cut while they're green, dried, and most of the times they're rolled up into squares or bales to be used for later for livestock or other purposes. And more so for hay, we'll be talking about actually in the next slide, but for straw is an excellent winter mulch to use because of its hollow stalks. It's able to offer a great amount of insulation and really trap in that warmth in the summer and the winter months. And one thing, though, however, to keep in mind is, again, to always remember where your materials have been in contact with. It can be common to have weed seeds that you would not prefer mixed in with the straw and hay. So be always aware that you're not introducing noxious weed species like knapweed or kochia or Russian thistle into your mulch. That will kind of defeat the purpose of the weed suppressants and make more problems for you later on. But a great mulch for in the winter. And also one thing to also consider is that if a lot of stray and hay are piled into a thick enough layer as your mulch, it can become a decent habitat and home for rodents. So be careful that you're not creating habitats for pests that you may not want munching on your crops. The next thing that we all experience, most people have at least a little bit of grass in their yards that they have to maintain. There's no reason that any grass clippings or leaves should go to waste. They also make a great form of mulch. Because they are very green species, very green and grassy, they're very high in nitrogen. And so they are a great additive into your soil if you're wanting to help balance out that carbon and nitrogen ratio. The one thing that is good to remember about grasses, specifically cut ones, you can see with the lawnmower picture here, it's very important to not clump up your grass whenever you lay it down as mulch. You can spread it out in evenly 1 to 2 inches in depth so that it's thin enough that it's not going to retain too much moisture and start to develop fungus and bacteria that will cause it to rot instead of decompose. Oh, and I just realized that 1 to 2 inches is way too much. Go for about 1/4 inch of grass over your mulching area, and that should be fit enough but dense enough to offer good mulch and good nutrients. The next one is one that I personally like to use in my garden is paper. Paper is literally carbon in one of its most purest forms, and so it is a great biodegradable option to also add in some carbon into your carbon and nitrogen ratio. And depending on the type of paper you use, will determine, one, how much you're going to have to use and how often you're going to have to put it down. My old-fashioned trick that I learned from my family was before in our flower beds, being able to put down a nice layer of newspaper before putting down a layer of 1 to 2 inches of bark mulch. That offers as another preventative measure for weeds, and because especially for newspaper and printer paper, they're so incredibly thin that they do biodegrade in 1 year, so that is something that you will have to constantly do every season. But because of that and they're quick to degrade, they're also more quickly adding carbon into your soil. And also be careful anytime that you're using cardboard or paper. You always have to use something to anchor it down, of course. It will fly away, especially out here in the 4 corners. So always make sure that you have your mulch that is not heavy enough anchored down. Another aspect is living mulches that has been getting a lot of popularity. And living mulches is a form of cover crop that is planted and grown at the same time as your cash crop. And it's really important to make sure that you understand the life cycles of both your cash crop and the living crop, the cover crop that you decide to use as your living mulch. It's very important to make sure that the living mulch occupies the lower canopy and offers this broad ground cover, such as this sweet clover in New Zealand and an apple orchard. And also to cover the ground, but also to leave the canopy space for your actual cash crops. And it's important to know that not all cover crops can act as a living mulch. Sometimes, depending on when they're based with other cash crops, your cover crops can be have very aggressive growth habits. And so you're looking for a variety of living mulch that does not grow exceedingly fast, stays low to the ground, and won't impede the growth of your cash crops. One option that has been getting in popularity here is using clovers in our fields in between the rows and along the rows to be able to literally be able to fix your own nitrogen much more quickly than using dead material. Now we're on into the inorganics. So rock and gravel can come in a variety of different forms, of course, from the tiniest grain of gravel to big rocks that you can incorporate into your overall landscaping plan. And because they are inorganic, again, they do tend to last longer. They are indeed heavier and stay more in place. Oftentimes, whenever you put down rock and gravel mulch, you'll have a harder time being able to plant anything after that because the rocks have set in. And so it's more so based for an area that is more of a xeriscaping feel. It more so is preferred with plants that are drought resistant because the rocks have the ability to not only protect the soil below from absorbing the heat from the sun, but the rocks themselves have the natural ability to hold on to that heat as well. And so oftentimes, inorganic rock and gravel mulch areas can be warmer for plants, and so it's better to use more drought-resistant varieties when incorporating rock mulch. One thing that is also to be cautious of limestone and marble. These materials may look great, but they are almost pure lime and can increase the acidity of your soil. If laid on the top, as water comes in and percolates through, it will transfer all of that lime into your soil, and if in too much quantities, it can also cause an imbalance. So anything like quartz or brick pieces or gravel or river rock are good options. Another option to use is using any type of plastic fabric that you may need. They work effectively at suppressing weeds by offering, especially the black material. It is a barrier for the sunlight to get through. They can help with suppressing weed growth and evaporation to an extent. Another option is using clear plastic fabric. That will help retain moisture, but that is an option that still allows for there to be enough sunlight to allow things to grow. So clear plastic would not be nearly as good if your goal is intended to keep your weeds down. And this plastic mulch can be a popular choice, especially in cooler climates for gardeners or in cooler climates who find it hard to keep your soil warm. So this can be a great option in the early spring to put over in the summer, also to keep the soil warm so that you can start planting a little bit earlier. However, it can be a barrier for water and air to go through. Since this plastic is a non-permeable surface, it can really decrease the rate of any type of oxygen transfer and aeration of the soil. So that's something to keep in mind. But because it is so cost effective and easy to use, it's non-biodegradable, it lasts for years, eventually it will deteriorate in the next 2 or 3 years, but it's a lot less maintenance, it can be cost effective, and especially if there are any farmers that are doing a larger operation, it may be your first choice. The next is fabric and netting. This is a form of inorganic mulch that is very similar to plastic fabric. Any type of good quality landscaping fabric that you have, it is going to be more porous than actual sheeted plastic. It does have pores where air and water is able to better percolate and transfer through. And it oftentimes can help any type of nutrients or fertilizers or anything that would be used to help better penetrate the soil and allow those plants to use them. However, cheap landscape fabric can rip easily and break down quickly and may cost extra money in the long run to replace. But landscaping fabric is also an excellent choice for doing any type of steep bank erosion control. And if you've got a specific type of biodegradable fabric netting, that can be a key tool to be able to hold down soil, but not have the residual plastic being there for a long time. So I know I just threw a lot of information out about different varieties of mulching, and so it can be really hard to figure out which mulch is the best option for you. There's so many different varieties at different costs depending on where you go to get them. There's also the transportation involved. And so before you start, before as myself would do, go and think about all these at once, there's 3 things that when first considering the type of mulching practice that you want to use to consider. First is to know your goal. Know what you want to achieve by doing your mulching practice. Is it to keep the soil cooler in the summer so that you have better productivity for some plants that are less drought resistant? Is it to keep your soil warmer in the winter so that you can start growing a little bit sooner? Is it, of course, to retain moisture? Is there exposed ground that needs to be covered and offered that protective, blanketed, spongy layer? Do you have a weed problem? Is there a specific type of weed or pest that you're wanting to keep out of your area? That can help you choose a different variety. Especially for soils here in the Southwest and the Four Corners area, the soil, for anything to be able to do with it, has to be worked with, and organic materials has to be incorporated. And so it's good to also inventory if that is one of your goals. And lastly, if it's just to beautify your area, that is also one of your goals as well. The second is to know, okay, so you know your goals, which can help better lead you to the type of material you're going to use. But how much? How large of an area are you going to need to cover? One simple mathematical equation that you can use for reference is length times width times height. You're literally counting the area of the literal area of the region that you're wanting to lay down this mulch, and then considering how high you want that mulch to be. Multiplying that all together gives you the typical unit that we use for the quantity of bagged mulch and other items, which is cubic feet units. So for example, say that if you had a 10-foot by 10-foot area that you wanted to mulch, and you wanted to do about 3 inches of mulch high throughout this entire area, that 10 times 10 times a quarter of a foot would equal to about 25 cubic feet. So that will give you about a quantity that you're going to need. And it's also too important to remember how much of that mulch is needed to cover that area, how thick you want it to be, and that can relate into the cost. So there are some limitations into mulching and some practices to best know when first starting out of things to look out for. Mulch is a great, simple, cost-effective way to hold in moisture, but when not mulched properly, you can hold in too much moisture, and it really restricts the oxygen flow and not allowing water to percolate in the soil. Literally, it's kind of, you can mulch the soil to death and start to suffocate it if not done correctly. At the same time, when considering different types of mulch, you also want to think about the different pests and wildlife, specifically the wildlife that you're living with around in your area. Is this a type of mulch that would make good habitat or a home for them that can attract different pests that you're wanting to keep out? Specifically, if you have a mouse or rat problem in your area, smaller pests, maybe snakes, other stick debris or hay and straw may work best if applied in a different strategy. And oftentimes, especially whenever we're dealing with trees, especially whenever you're first planting trees, it's always a good practice to be able to mulch around the base so that you're able, again, as we've been reviewing, to retain that moisture, allow for a little bit of a stable temperature, and help those trees take in as much nutrients as they can. However, if unmulched a little bit too much, the goal is to never create a volcano of mulch at the base of your tree. If you do that, that can hold too much moisture into the bark of the tree, and you can cause the bark to start to rot, and the bark will literally start to fall off. And after a couple of years, you will kill your tree. And so it's important to remember that whenever we're mulching, we're oftentimes trying to mirror the natural environments and different qualities that oftentimes help propagate plants in our native land to be at the most effective, healthy, and ecologically balanced that they can be. I just want to thank everyone for joining this discussion on different mulching topics and different varieties and practices. There are plenty of resources out there for you to further do your own research on different varieties. The USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service has an excellent tip on documents with tips on mulching. The New Mexico State University College of Agriculture, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences has a database of publications that cover a wide variety of agricultural topics, including mulching. And it's also just as important to learn from other farmers and naturalists like you who are learning from experience. And so there are a couple of platforms that can also be used, including Gardening Know-How and Mother Earth News. There's always great tips on different trials, things learned, things improved when it comes to mulching. I want to thank you again for joining this discussion. Again, my name is Alyssa with the San Juan Soil and Water Conservation District, and happy mulching.